to keep in mind. One, we are having our virtual escape room activity on Zoom tomorrow evening. That's at 7:30 p.m. So if that's something you would like to attend, please plan on doing so. We sent out the link for the Zoom room that we're going to be using for that, I believe on Monday, but we'll send it out again tomorrow as a reminder. So just be on the lookout for that and plan to attend if that's something you want to do. And then also tomorrow is when the poll closes for next year's IPSO president. So if you have not yet voted for next year's IPSO president, please make sure you do that. Yeah, anyway, that's it. Thanks. We'll see you afterward today.
Thank you so much, Maku. It sounds like Dr. Graham also has an announcement, so we'll just give him a moment as well. You're muted.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome, Tom. Glad to see you. Thanks for joining us. I have a really important announcement for all of our students. You know that we're in the midst of making some important changes to our program that we think are going to strengthen you as students and provide a little more flexibility for you in your program. I've sent out documents to everyone to look at. They're draft documents, but we're giving you a chance to provide input to us on these changes and the schedule that will accompany the changes. Our meeting is next Monday at noon. And even if you can't come to the meeting, we'll be recording it, but we'd like your input. This is your chance to provide input, so please do. Thanks, that's all, Jason.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. Well, we are very excited to have Dr. Tom Reeves with us today for our seminar, Professor Emeritus from the University of Georgia. We consider him a friend of our program. He's made some significant contributions to the field of educational technology. We're so glad that he's willing to join us this afternoon. We are looking forward to learning from him. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Reeves to our seminar, and Tom will just now turn the balance of our time over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jason. And it's great to be here and to see so many friendly faces that I know, folks like Heather and Charles and others. It's really feel like a homecoming. I had mentioned to Jason earlier, I spent 18 months in Utah back in the 60s when I was in the Army. I was stationed at Dugway Proving Ground. So I'm very familiar with the beautiful state of Utah. Right now, my wife and I and our two dogs are living in the beautiful state of Colorado. Sadly, we're in Boulder, Colorado. We're out here for 3 months. And of course, you probably have all heard about the tragedy that took place here earlier in the week. And people just are in shock here. So I'm going to share my screen and see, hopefully you'll be able to see my slides here in a second. Can you see my slides now?
Yes.
Great, great. So the topic today is addressing wicked problems through educational design research, and get into that a little bit more. As I mentioned, my wife, Tricia Reeves, is a professor emeritus of social work from the University of Georgia, and we got our COVID shots in January, and then started planning for a big trip. We're exploring this area as a possible retirement area, so we'll be out here in Boulder until June. And we have our two little Westies with us, Button and Zipper. And if you're Facebook friends with me, then you know these dogs very well. I've taught at the University of Georgia since 1982. This was one of the last formal classes I taught. It was actually a class on design-based research, and I co-taught it with Susan McKinney, who I ended up writing the book about educational design research with. She's there on the right. You may see some faces you recognize there. There's a couple of, I think, students who were BYU undergrads. All of these students, this was from 2010, I think, all of these students finished their PhDs and are gainfully employed literally around the world. So I miss face-to-face classes. Last night I taught a class at Georgia via Zoom, and I'll do another one next week. And I still keep an office on campus. I'm still involved in various classes and also fundraising, that sort of thing. So what's a wicked problem? Well, a wicked problem is an intractable problem, a very difficult, complex problem, one that doesn't lend itself to simple heuristics or algorithms. So if you'd like to identify some wicked problems that you might be concerned about, you could type those into the chat area, and we can look at those a little bit later. One source of wicked problems that I use is the Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations. Certainly each of these, poverty being one of the most intractable problems in history, hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, et cetera. All of these bring to mind wicked problems, not easy to solve problems. Most of my work these days is done in two areas. One is medical education, the other is actually corrections. And this morning I was on a Zoom call with some folks from Prison Fellowship. I've been helping them now for about 7 years develop better ways of providing moral education in prisons. And I've visited quite a few prisons. I haven't in the last year, obviously, because of the pandemic, but we're continuing to do some amazing work in this area and applying design-based research as well. But in the medical area, I'm going to give you some examples here. And by the way, if you have a comment or question as we go along, don't hesitate to identify yourself and raise that. Because I can give a lecture for sure, but on the other hand, we can keep it a little more interactive as well. In medicine, we've made some amazing progress. And anytime you see a Time magazine with something about medical science, normally it's pretty good news. For example, there's been a 70% decline in the US death rate from cardiovascular disease over the past 50 years, a drop of more than 1% annually in the cancer death rate over the past 20 years. Life expectancy has increased from a child born in the US from 47 years in 1900 to 78 years today, although I just recently read that that's declined by a year in the wake of the pandemic. But still, amazing progress done in medical science by applying traditional research methods, randomized controlled trials most often. Certainly we saw that in the rapid development of vaccines. I know in my state, the governor just announced that anyone 16 and above can now get a vaccine. I'm 73, so I was in the early cohort of folks that were able to get the vaccine, but now many states are opening it up to just about everyone. And it really was an amazing accomplishment to get these vaccines developed so early. But what about education? Well, the news here is not so good. And particularly in the wake of the pandemic, where we've had to force teachers and learners online. Just this morning, I saw an article from the Madison, Wisconsin newspaper that basically was saying that online education has been a failure, that learning has been retarded for many learners and that many learners have gone missing. And we know that in certain states, up to 20% of students just simply aren't going to school anymore. It's just, it's a real, you would have thought that our field of educational technology would have been better prepared to handle this, but unfortunately we really weren't. And so when you see a Time magazine with education on the cover, it's generally not good news. Standardized testing, punitive accountability, school choice, all these have utterly failed. Still to this day, nearly half of our students qualify for free or reduced lunches. Federal and state investments in higher education have greatly declined. I don't know about Utah, but in my state, when I started teaching at Georgia in 1982, we probably got 42% of our funding from the state. Now it's around 20%. So it's just, bad news all around when it comes to education. In educational research, there's often a struggle between those who advocate rigor and those who advocate relevance. For example, Robert Slavin from Johns Hopkins University has written several textbooks on educational research, and he says there's only 5 questions that need to be asked about an educational research study. And he's a big proponent of randomized controlled trials. So these questions: is there a control group? Are the control and experimental groups assigned randomly? If it's a matched study, are the groups extremely similar? Is the sample size large enough, and are the results statistically significant? Notice he doesn't talk about educationally significant or socially significant. Another perspective is offered by Charles DeForges from the United Kingdom, who's also written textbooks on educational research. And I like his position. He says the status of research deemed educational would have to be judged first in terms of its discipline quality. And I think we can all agree with that. We need rigor, we need quality, we need discipline. And secondly, in terms of its impact, poor discipline is no discipline. And excellent research without impact is not educational. And so much of educational research, unfortunately, doesn't have much impact. It doesn't go over the walls of the classroom and help teachers and students learn, whether that classroom wall is real or virtual. Educational technology research, I would argue, is particularly susceptible to this problem. We're a field replete with no significant differences. I used to be the editor of one of these journals. I suspect your faculty could have published in every one of these journals. Every quarter these journals come out, and they're full of research. But unfortunately, it seems that much of the research that's published here is driven more by publish or perish, to build up our academic careers, to get promotion and tenure, not necessarily focused on real world problems that teachers and students and parents and society at large face with respect to education. There's also in our field too much research on things. Whenever a new thing comes out, whether it's 3D printers or smartphones or virtual reality, you can predict that there's going to be a whole series of studies that compare this new thing with traditional instruction. And all too often, of course, that yields no significant difference. There's too little research on problems. We have enormous problems in education. We can see that right now with the pandemic, where we're really failing to engage our online learners. We're poor learner motivation, lack of intellectual curiosity, and insufficient time on task. Learning isn't easy. One of the big lies that educational technology is told is that learning is easy and fun. It's not easy. Learning is hard. Learning takes effort. Learning takes time on task. And so, studies are showing that in a typical school day, whether it's face-to-face, blended, or online, students experience actually as little as 50 minutes of actual time on task, really meaningful, engaged learning. So in reaction to all of this, I've been a proponent of more socially responsible research. It goes by many names: design-based research, development research, and a popular term in Europe, educational design research. Susan McKinney, who I first started working with when she was a graduate student at the University of Twente. She's now a full professor there. We wrote a book called Conducting Educational Design Research. I wanted to call it Educational Design Research, the Missing Manual, but it's now in a second edition. It's been translated into some languages like Japanese, and it's being translated into Chinese and Portuguese and so forth. Basically, we argue that educational design research is not defined by its methods, but by its goals. It's very eclectic with respect to methods, uses mixed methods more often than not, but its goals, one, you want a robust program, product, or policy to address a wicked problem, a serious problem in education. And the second goal is to develop usable knowledge and theory, such as reusable design principles. And so I'm going to illustrate some of those here in just a moment. Our model, our generic model for conducting educational design research is shown here. And like all models, it kind of gives you a sense of what's involved, but you really have to see it in action. And so I'll show you a study where that has been applied. Another way of just summarizing it, though, is that first and foremost, EDR or DBR, whatever you want to call it, begins with close collaboration with practitioners to define an important pedagogical outcome that addresses a wicked problem. And then you create a prototype learning environment informed by the best possible theory and practice to address that problem. I would argue you need to emphasize content and pedagogy rather than technology alone. Technology may indeed have an important role, but it shouldn't be the first thing you think about. Content, pedagogy, instructional design, those are the most important factors in my mind. You want to give special attention to supporting human interactions. And then you go through iterative stages of testing, refinement, and retesting the learning environment until the outcome is reached, and refine theory simultaneously. So what might this look like? Well, let's start by looking at a doctoral dissertation that was published in EDUCAUSE Review in 2015. This student dissertation was called and published as an article, Paper or Tablet, Reading, Recall, and Comprehension. And the study basically examined whether people learn more from reading an article on paper or reading it on some sort of iPad or other tablet device. She did her study, her doctoral dissertation, at the U.S. Coast Guard School for non-commissioned officers. And she herself was in the Coast Guard when she did this study. I believe she still is. And the study was used, a randomized controlled trial. Slavin would have loved this. She had, because it's a military context, she could do this. She randomly assigned 231 students to either read an article on a digital tablet or on a piece of paper. It was an 800-word leadership article. So her treatment for her doctoral dissertation was less than 10 minutes in length. She had pre-post test measures using 10 multiple choice items to measure recall accuracy and 2 short essay questions to measure comprehension. So what do you think she found through this randomized controlled trial? Well, I won't keep you in suspense. No significant differences. Why would there have been any differences? Why was this approved as a doctoral dissertation? I have no idea. But I mean, who didn't know that if you gave people an 800-word leadership article, that, by the way, wasn't even a part of their coursework, so they didn't really have an investment in reading it anyway, but that whether they read it on a digital tablet or on a piece of paper wouldn't make a whit of difference. And of course it didn't. But that's what passes for educational technology research, unfortunately, in many cases. So how would we do a study like this better if we did educational design research? Well, first and foremost, I'd want to work with the practitioners at the Coast Guard training school to find out what's the problem. Are people not doing the readings? Are the readings not aligned with the assessments? Why did they bring these tablets in the first place? Why did they invest in these? Are they trying to cut down on printing costs? So we'd go through a phase of analysis and exploration to try to really understand what's the nature of the problem that this research should address within the Coast Guard Academy. As I mentioned, it could be a problem with course alignment. Perhaps they have higher order objectives, but then some of the other factors, and anytime you have a learning environment, these are the 7 most critical factors: your learning objectives, your content, your instructional design, your learner task, what are the learners going to do, the faculty or instructor roles, technology roles, and the assessment. If these things aren't carefully aligned, if you have higher order objectives, but then you test at the discrete multiple choice level, then there's a misalignment and there's going to be a problem. But I'd want to really understand what's the problem at the Coast Guard Academy that necessitated getting these iPads or tablets in the first place. And then would work with the practitioners to build a prototype solution. So we'd go into the design and construction phase. And we've already seen that whether you read on a tablet or read on paper doesn't make a difference. But perhaps if they really had some complex outcomes that they were trying to help these folks learn. For example, imagine that they were trying to help these Coast Guard non-commissioned officers learn about safe practices for rescuing migrants at sea who are in overloaded boats. Very complex problem. We know that in the Mediterranean right now, there are likely to be people that are drowning who are in these terrible overcrowded boats and so forth. So how do you safely interdict and rescue people on these types of vessels? Well, then you might have an interactive simulation where you really use the affordances of the tablet devices. And that could be a prototype solution to a problem that they might have. Again, we need to understand the problem before we could prototype a solution. And then we would go through a phase of testing and refinement of this prototype solution through evaluation and reflection. And you go through multiple iterative versions of this. And this is where our representation of our model, I think, fails a little bit because it doesn't really show the iterative nature of the evaluation and reflection. But in the end, what you hope is that you have a mature intervention that addresses the problem the study started with and enhanced theoretical understanding, enhanced design principles. So educational design research is driven by the need for impact on real world problems. So I want to give you an example of a doctoral dissertation that actually applies EDR focused on a real world problem. But before I do that, let me just see if anyone has any burning questions or comments they'd like to make at this time.
I've got one, Dr. Reeves. This is Steve Francis. I'm a student. I'm just curious if part of the issue is the time and the money around EDR, that it for sure, is going to fix these wicked problems or try to, but it seems like it takes more effort and more money and more time. Is that maybe one case why people aren't doing this kind of research?
I think that may be the case, and I know that some folks there have heard this from me before, but I really put the onus back on the faculty for that, because I don't think we can continue to have the model where students come into a doctoral program and take 2 or 3 years of coursework, and then suddenly it's like, oh, what's my dissertation going to be? Where am I going to do this dissertation? How could I do it in 9 months or 12 months? So I think it's important for faculty to have research agendas underway that students can plug themselves into, that they don't have to start their whole research project themselves. The daughter of one of my dearest friends got her PhD in food science at the University of Georgia. The day she arrived in the doctoral program, her major professors said to her, "Here are the studies you're going to do over the next 3 to 4 years. And they're going to be part of my overall research agenda." And that's what she did. And she finished her degree in 3.5 years and had all kinds of publications when she finished her degree and got a good job afterwards. So we really need to have robust research agendas. I would love to see all the various educational technology doctoral programs in the country meet at PIDT or some other ACT and really say, okay, BYU, we're going to focus on these intractable, wicked problems. In Georgia, we're going to focus on these. In Florida, we're going to focus on these. And there, of course, would be collaboration and so forth. But that students then could come in and plug their research interests right into these ongoing major studies. I hope that addressed your problem. Your quite excellent question, by the way. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, well, I'll move on. So again, I mentioned I try to get my students to identify their dissertations focused on serious problems, and Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations is one such source. The study I'm going to talk to you about was the last dissertation I co-supervised, focused on good health and well-being. In particular, the problem of vaccine quality management. So I didn't know anything about this until I started working for the World Health Organization about 12 years ago. But vaccines have to be kept at a certain temperature range. Most common vaccines have to be between 4 and 8 degrees centigrade. And if they get too warm, they're ruined. If they get frozen, they're ruined. And so it's a really difficult problem, particularly in developing countries. Of course, we're all aware of the cold chain problem now because of vaccines like the Pfizer vaccine that has to be kept at extremely cold temperatures. So I think most people in the world, or certainly in the US today, are familiar with the cold chain problem. The notion is that a vaccine, let's say it comes into a developing country, it's manufactured in France, it gets put into a warehouse, it's kept at that important temperature, but eventually it's got to get to a rural area, maybe a village on the back of a donkey or a motorbike or something like that. And it has to, that temperature range has to be maintained, has to be tracked and maintained. It's called the cold chain management problem. And the World Health Organization for many years has addressed this problem by teaching a course called Pharmaceutical Cold Chain Management on Wheels. Once a year, they ran a course in Turkey where they brought in 15 people from developing countries, and these are physicians and pharmacists and public health inspectors and so forth. And they would put them on a bus and they would travel down the cold chain. I actually got to go on this bus course a few years ago, and it was quite exciting. This was the class that I was part of. You can see the 15 learners at the top there, and then the mentors, including my doctoral student, Jim, who wasn't there physically, but joined us via Skype for this particular bus. He's been on several of the other buses. And they run this once a year. And this was the route that I was on. We started off in Izmir and went all the way down to Antalya in Turkey. Unfortunately, because of problems in Turkey now, they're having to run this course in Greece. Turkey, it turns out, has one of the very best cold chain management systems in the country, in the world rather. But along the way, we visited places like warehouses and university hospitals, provincial vaccine storage facilities, family health centers, retail pharmacies, small warehouses, and so forth. It's an experiential learning course. The learners are split up into 3-person teams. Here's some learners from, I believe, Ghana, India, and the US. And along the way, we engage them in activities. They share the plan of the day. They do the evaluation of the day. They do warm-up exercises and so forth. There are a lot of real-world authentic activities built into this course. So, for example, one of the first, on the first morning, each team is given vials of vaccine, and they have all kinds of different storage materials, and they have to package those vaccines, and then they're put underneath the bus that they travel on until the end of the week when they're taken out, and they see which vaccines were stored well and which are still viable, which have been ruined. So it's a real world challenge. Along the way, we visit all kinds of facilities, large refrigerated storage facilities where the learners get to observe and ask questions of the local personnel. And at each site we visited, the learners themselves came up with both positive and negative practices that they observed. Here we are in a commercial pharmacy, and we got right down to the area where inoculations are done. Turns out Turkey has a 98% compliance rate with infant inoculations. At the end of every day, we would pull over to a restaurant or a tea house, and the learners and their teams would share what they learned that day. And their whole week was focused on developing a better cold chain management plan for their country when they would go back to their developing country. At the end of the course, people got certificates, and it was a very emotional learning experience. I'll give Jason and these slides so that he can share them with you, and you can go out to some of these videos if you'd like and see the course and see the reactions of the learners. Again, these learners are professionals in their own right. They're physicians, they're public health inspectors, pharmacists, and they had never learned this way. They had never had an experiential learning event like this. So what's the wicked problem? Well, the wicked problem was that only the WHO could only afford to do this once a year for 15 learners. And yet there are thousands of learners who need this course. And so the challenge was, how do you convert an experiential learning course that takes place on a bus into an e-learning environment? In other words, how do you fit a bus into a computer screen? That was our challenge. The physician I worked with at the World Health Organization, Umut Kurtoglu, he's retired now, but he had read an earlier book that I co-wrote with Jen Harrington and Ron Oliver called A Guide to Authentic E-Learning. And he asked me to come over to Geneva and talk about this. And then when we were discussing it, he said, do you think we could convert this bus course into an online course? And I said, of course we can, not realizing it was going to take a while to do that, but we did it. Our book has our Authentic Learning book has 9 design principles. I won't go into these in great detail, but I'll show you how they're applied within the course that we developed. About that same time, you see Umut there on the left, he's an MD. Jim Vesper is someone I've known for many years, and he and I have co-taught. We teach 2 courses for the WHO. One's a week-long course on how to design a course for learning, and the other's a week-long course on how to teach. And Jim had his own company in the USA. And one day he said to me, Tom, I'd really love to get a PhD, but I just can't afford to shut down my company and come to Georgia and do that. And I said, no problem. You can do your PhD by research only. through an Australian university. So Jan Harrington is someone that I'd worked with since 1993, and she and I co-supervised Jim's dissertation that he did through Murdoch University in Western Australia. And we would meet all over the world, in Australia and Canada and Turkey and so forth. Here we are in Turkey, working with Umut, who I mentioned is the MD for the WHO, myself, Jim Vesper, my doctoral student, and Gökhan Gürses was head of a company called Appella, and they did the production on the course that we developed. The course, you can go out and take a look at it through this link. Our motto is Go Authentic. And we really tried to align things very carefully within this course. We wanted people to really have higher order objectives. They're trying to develop a robust mental model of the cold chain problem and how to handle that. There's no one right answer, so we wanted them to have multiple perspectives. We wanted to use experiential learning as our instructional design. We wanted the learners to be engaged in authentic tasks rather than academic tasks. The instructor roles were as mentors rather than as lecturers. The technology role was to foster communications and collaboration. And then the assessment was focused on mental models. And I'll show you how we did that in just a moment. This course really focused on higher order objectives for the most part. If you think about the cognitive domain, we were focused mainly on analyzing, evaluating, and creating rather than the remembering, understanding, and applying. The course provided multiple perspectives. So we took a 1-week course face-to-face on a bus and converted it into a 12-week course online. The first 7 weeks were simulations of the actual bus tour. So they would spend the first 7 weeks visiting a hospital, vaccine stores, a pharmacy, et cetera, family health centers, and they would be faced with problems at each of those. The last 5 weeks of the course, they were focused on a real-world problem from a real-world client, a country, a developing country that needed help managing their cold chain. Again, I encourage you to go out, take a look at the course, but they were given real-world problems. For example, they might say 1 week, the problem might be your refrigerated truck has broken down. You need to get these vaccines moved to this rural village on the top of a hill far away in Turkey. How are you going to package these vaccines and take them there in an alternative vehicle? And so they would work in their 3-person teams to come up with a solution to that authentic but simulated problem. They worked in collaborative teams. Again, just like on the bus, in the online course, we have 15 to 24 learners, and they work in teams. Here you see 2 teams. There's a learner there from Russia, one from Sri Lanka, and one from India. The other team is a learner from Cuba, the USA, and now the USA is not a developing country, but we often had people from the USA who worked in developing countries, and then from Ghana. And so they would collaborate online in these teams. We use Google Docs for them to share their products, their learner tasks, their solutions. The technology and the instructor roles were as mentors and guides. Jim Vesper was one of the experts, and so we had he was a doctoral student, but also an expert. He's written books on things like managing pharmaceutical production. And others, and then we would have live chats available. The focus of the technology was both to allow communications and collaboration, but also authentic simulations that we had for various tasks. And finally, the assessment was real-world assessment. The final 5 weeks of the course was they worked in their teams for a real-world client. For a given client, conduct a critical analysis of the cold chain management system and make recommendations to improve the performance of the system in line with good distribution practices and good storage practices. So countries like Albania and Ghana and Nigeria would their public health organizations would submit all their documentation on how they handle the cold chain, and our teams then would come up with better approaches for them. That was the major assessment in the overall course. So again, the alignment here was, such that the higher order objectives were focused, through content, through instructional design, through learner tasks, the roles of the facilitators, the roles of the technology, and the assessment. All of these things were carefully aligned. Now, in the bus course, it was a very emotional last night. We would have a dinner and we give out certificates and prizes and things, and learners actually would cry because they had never learned this way before. And so my goal is that we would develop e-learning courses that are so powerful, so experiential, that people would cry when they end. That's where I want to get us, but we aren't there yet. Now you might say, well, what did Jim do for his dissertation using our model? We did a lot of things, and I don't have time to go through all of it. But for example, Jim there on the left, he brought together a panel of experts, and we rented a house in Georgia for a few days, and he did a risk analysis. As the course was nearing completion, he did a thorough risk analysis of what could go wrong, what could, and how could we be prepared for that in this course, and brought in experts from Europe and the US for that. Here he is conducting that. He also did a lot of formative evaluation. Ipella, their initial look and feel for the course was very cartoonish. Jim, as the doctoral student, shared this with experts and representatives of the learners, and found that while it looked cute, it really wasn't what they wanted to have. And so the eventual main screen of the course looks like this. You've got your geographic map in the middle. On the side, you've got all the places you're going to visit and the different tasks you're going to do, resources along the bottom, and so forth. Now, one of the things that comes out of a doctoral dissertation that uses EDR is a set of design principles. Jim's dissertation yielded 9 design principles. I'll just talk about 3 of them. One is with respect to e-learning, rather than perfectly duplicate, replicate where possible, and innovate where necessary. So for example, I mentioned that in the bus course, they pack vaccines on the first morning of the course, and at the end of they're put underneath the bus, and at the end of the week, they're brought out, and we see which vaccines are still viable. Well, we couldn't replicate that in the online course, but other tasks we could. So for example, one of the things they learned in the bus is how to do a shake test. If you think a vial of vaccine has been frozen, you can shake it and then watch how the sentiment falls and tell whether or not that vaccine has been shaken. So what we did in the e-learning course is we would ship learners vials of vaccine, some of which we knew had been frozen, some which hadn't been, and they had to video themselves doing the shake test and identifying which vaccines had been frozen. Another design principle is that the collaboration that's essential to instantiating authentic task-based learning strategies online is a new experience for most learners, and it has to be carefully nurtured. So in this course, which we've now, by the way, applied this design to some other courses, recently had an article in Tech Trends about the application of this design to a totally different course teaching about pharmaceutical inspections, but a similar design. But what we found is that we really have to nurture the learners early on. Again, they're professionals, they're physicians and nurse practitioners and pharmacists. They have never learned online that much, and they really haven't learned in experiential online. So we play games and we do other activities to get them to form good teams and be ready to collaborate. The third design principle I'll share is that the fidelity of the simulated experiential learning environment does not have to be high, as long as it enables learners to suspend disbelief and feel that what they are experiencing is real. So one of the real values of the bus course was that they could go into these facilities and they could feel the cold temperatures and ask questions and so forth. We couldn't simulate temperature in the e-learning course, but we did have very high fidelity videos where they could go in and actually go down to the level of individual package of vaccines and look at the dates and so forth. We got very positive reactions. The learners said that the videos, the facilities tour, it almost feels like you're walking with the camera. This is something that makes the course so lively. Now, the good news is this course has won awards around the world for e-learning design. There's UMIT with one of the awards. The WHO was very pleased about this. Unfortunately, the WHO forces their employees to retire at age 65. So Umid has retired from the WHO, but he and I continue to collaborate on a number of projects for other clients. Jim got his, earned his PhD, and I wasn't able to go to the graduation, but there he is with my co-supervisor, his co-supervisor, Jan Harrington. And I encouraged Jim to submit his dissertation for an award at the Association for Talent Development, ATD. Now it used to be called ASTD. And Jim won the Dissertation of the Year award. There, they flew him out to Denver for the conference that year and gave him a cash prize and an award for the best dissertation of the year in the field of training, which I think it was. Now, there are other students who have done their doctoral dissertations. Eunjung Oh, who's now an associate professor at the University of Illinois, one of our top universities. She did her dissertation with me, was focused on enhancing group work in an e-learning evaluation course. She did hers in 3 iterations over 3 semesters, where I took my evaluation course that I taught for 25 years, put it online, and we had learners from all over the world involved in the course. I can share these dissertations with you. Another dissertation, you may know, some of you may know David Picaro, and David did his dissertation using educational design research. I co-supervised this study with Jeanette Hill. I'll tell you something about David. If you know David, he got a presidential fellowship at the University of Georgia. He's one of the smartest people on the planet. And he'd earlier gotten his master's in Sumerian languages, I think, at Cambridge University in the UK. He did his dissertation funded by a Fulbright in Oman, focused on introducing undergraduate students, teacher education students, to collaborative knowledge building, constructivism, if you will. And excellent dissertation. The day he defended his dissertation was, you know, he didn't have to change a single word, a single comma in his dissertation. It was perfect. Not all dissertations are like that. So I would say, you know, I would encourage you to think about doing an educational design research study, or whether you want to call it design-based research, mainly because it enables a balance between the relevance and the rigor that I would say is more socially responsible. You know, I've known students who have done doctoral dissertations at public universities focused on esoteric things like what people talk about when they're having coffee in a bookstore. Well, okay, but you know, you've got a graduate assistantship in the state that you're in is paying, you know, the taxpayers are paying for that. Is that really the most serious problem you could address? So I would really say we need to focus on serious problems, maybe wicked problems. So before I wrap up, let me open it up again for some questions.
Actually, Tom, we do have to conclude the seminar. We're at the concluding time, but
okay. Well, in that case, I'll just put this slide up and say, don't waste your life. Do design research, educational design research. And there's my contact information, and don't hesitate to contact me through email and so forth, and I'll be glad to help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. What a wonderful presentation and set of insights. Students, please take Tom up on his kind offer if you would like to contact for some more information. So